Welcome to the state of Ohio. I'm Karen Kassler. In his vetoes of 4 property tax related items in the 2-year state budget, Governor Mike DeWine created a working group to look into Ohio's property tax laws. Legislators said such a panel was not needed since a bipartisan joint commission of lawmakers had done that and earlier this year delivered 21 recommendations, 4 of which were in the budget in some form, along with a 40% cap on property tax collected by school districts as a percentage of their operating budgets, with the rest returned to taxpayers. But DeWine said this group would come up with suggestions by the end of next month on how to help struggling homeowners, renters, and farmers while still funding critical local services. The panel met last week and decided that going forward, it would meet privately and not accept public testimony. The panel is chaired by 2 Republicans, former Congressman and current head of the Ohio Business Roundtable, Pat Tiberi, and veteran former state lawmaker Bill Seitz, who I spoke to this week. Why is this working group on property tax laws needed if there were 21 recommendations from the bipartisan joint commission that looked into property tax laws last session?
Right. Well, number one, the 21 recommendations, as the report itself noticed, were contradictory to one another in many cases. Number two, the 21 recommendations were in the form of a single sentence without any implementing language or anything remotely that would pass muster with LSC. There's a lot of meat to put on those bones. And then number three, I think the governor wanted to make sure that there was adequate input on the implementation phase from those folks who are most involved and most affected by the changes. What am I talking about? County auditors, county treasurers, school superintendents, county commissioners, a mayor. That's the makeup of our committee, other than me and Congressman Tiberi. So it's to provide that additional set of eyes and try to solicit recommendations. I do not view this as being adversarial to the legislature at all. I think we are going to perhaps refine some of the things that they have already done and suggest for refinements, but also suggest for additional things that they should do. And on that, we all agree. I've heard from various key legislators, oh, this is just the first step. We've got a lot more to do on this subject. I agree with that. And in the limited 60-day time frame that's available to us, we're going to give it our old college try to come up with a weightier, meatier set of recommendations, some of which are already pending before the General Assembly and have not yet passed.
When you talk about having a working group that looks into the way that this is going to impact people who are directly affected, why won't these meetings be open to the public? Why won't you be taking public testimony?
Well, some of them, but first of all, we've only had one meeting that was closed, and that was this week. And the purpose of that meeting was simply to let each of the individual members of the task force offer their own initial points of view about what we should be looking at and about the big fat binder of materials that the governor's staff provided to us about a week ago. The next meeting will be open to the public, and we've had a lively debate among the members of the task force whether they should all be public or some private and some public. I don't know. I don't care. Most of us came down and said, well, we don't care if it's public, but some people are reluctant to be as candid as they might otherwise want to be in a public setting. And so we're trying to reach that balance, recognizing that this work group is not subject to the open meetings law. It's just an ad hoc group.
Will you be taking public testimony, though?
We do intend to have invited testimony, and we're going to be talking early next week about the schedule for who we should invite and when we should invite them. Actually, I had raised this week with our group, should we start invited testimony next Thursday at our next Thursday meeting? They said, no, we would like to come up with some concrete recommendations and then have the invited testimony be from experts who can comment and perhaps offer further suggestions on what we've come up with. I said, well, if that's what y'all want to do, I'll honor the wishes of the majority.
Senator Lou Blessing has said that state lawmakers are in two camps here when it comes to property taxes. One that wants to spend state dollars and means test property tax relief so locals won't get hurt. The other doesn't want to spend state dollars, which means locals will bear the brunt. Is that an accurate way to look at what's happening?
Well, it is difficult to provide meaningful property tax relief without some state funding involvement. All right. However, there are also a number of reforms that can be made to change things at the local level to retard the rate of growth of so-called inside millage and to retard the rate of growth under certain kinds of school levies that currently do not count towards the 20 mil floor and probably should count towards the 20 mil floor. So I don't view it as an either or situation. I'm very aware that the legislative leaders have said we don't want to spend any money. Okay, maybe you don't want to spend it today, but maybe you might want to spend it later as economics improve. But raising the homestead exemption and adopting some form of circuit breaker, as 30 states have already done, are two of the most common ways in the states of providing relief. And those measures all take state contribution. So, we're going to look into those measures, but we're very cognizant of the legislature's desire to spend as little state money as possible. They're elected, I'm not anymore, so they kind of get to call that shot.
There's been a real change in the property tax burden in the last 50 years. In 1975, property taxes were split 53.9% paid by commercial property owners, 46.1% by residential and agricultural property owners. Now in 2023, 32.5% were paid by commercial property owners, 67.5% paid by residential and agricultural property owners. Is that part of the problem here?
Well, yes, I believe it is part of the problem. We have, over my 24 years in the legislature, gone to great lengths to make Ohio a business-friendly state. We abolished the tangible personal property tax, which was a significant source of revenue for our schools. We abolished that in 2005 in the interest of helping out business and getting rid of the horrid inventory tax. We said we would replace that revenue with the CAT tax, the commercial activity tax, which we did for a while. But in the last couple of years, they have so far increased the exclusions from the CAT tax that the CAT tax is now not replacing the tangible personal property tax. And as a result, the schools deprived of that revenue are having to go back to the ballot and resort to various stratagems to try to get inflationary growth on their revenue stream. So, I'm a fair guy. I plead guilty. I was part of the group that wanted to improve our business climate. We did. We made tremendous strides on reducing income taxes, including most recently this year. We're down to a flat tax of 2.75%, which is a hell of a lot better than the 9 different brackets that existed when I first took office in 2001. But the consequence, and I'm sure it was an unintended consequence, was to exacerbate the burden on residential property owners of property tax. Well, that's true.
What do you think needs to be done about, say, tax abatements?
Well, I believe that I personally believe that the schools need a greater say before CRAs, which is a form of abatement, and TIFs, tax increment financing. Before those devices are used by local government, the schools deserve a say over their application in residential areas, because if a residential area is the beneficiary of a 10-year abatement of taxes, that just means that those people are blessed and everybody else has to pick up the slack for where for that grace extended to a small set of people. When I was trustee in Green Township many, many years ago, we created a huge tax increment finance program, but we kept our schools 100% harmless. You can have a very successful TIF while still recognizing the need of our schools for adequate revenue. So I would hope that one of our recommendations, and by the way, there are bills pending that would do this, that would, extend greater say to the school districts over the willy-nilly extension of tax abatements on residential property by units of local government.
Real quick, are you in favor of a cap on the amount of collected property tax from voter-approved levies that a district can hold as a percentage of its operating budget, with the rest refunded to taxpayers? That 40% cap is in the budget.
Well, I think the reaction from amongst our task force, and certainly my own reaction, is that that's not a very prudent thing to do. And the analogy I've used here throughout is to the Bible. If you remember in the Bible, they talked about the 7 fat years followed by the 7 lean years. And the game was, make sure your storehouses are filled during the 7 fat years, because you will need them during the 7 lean years. A one-size-fits-all cap probably does not really work. And so the task force members, I think unanimously, do not want to see that. Having said that, though, I think there's widespread interest on our task force in a different approach, which is Representative Hoops's House Bill 186, that basically says when the rate of increase in property valuations greatly exceeds the consumer price index inflation, these districts would only get the rate of actual inflation and not the much higher increase caused by the much higher valuations. That's a good approach. A variant of that approach is to limit the rate of increase to a specified percentage, 3%, 4%. Those are all fit subjects for discussion. But I know that the leading advocates in the legislature for more property tax reform are with me in saying that House Bill 186 must pass. I heard Representative Thomas say that last week. And so there's an area where I think we'll find common ground.
And finally, there's an effort to put before voters next fall an amendment that would abolish property taxes in Ohio entirely. Are you and others taking this seriously? I mean, what do you think the effect would be?
Well, I can tell everybody right now that the total elimination of property taxes in Ohio would create a $23 billion shortfall in money that currently supports local services exclusively. Your cops, your firemen, your teachers, your schools, your libraries, your zoos, your mental health levies, your et cetera. And that's all falling on the local level. That's a big problem. When you ask the proponents of this amendment, what would you replace that revenue with? They're kind of elusive in their answer. I've heard them suggest increased income taxes. Well, I don't really see any appetite to do that after the legislature has spent a quarter of a century reducing income taxes. And then they talk about increasing sales taxes, but you would need a statewide sales tax rate of something approximating 20% to make up for that revenue. And let's not forget, a whole lot of taxing jurisdictions have no power or authority to levy a sales tax. Townships don't, libraries don't, mental health don't, parks do not. So suggesting that we raise the sales tax when those entities, many of them don't even have authority to do a sales tax, is not the smartest thing in the world to me to do. And as I said yesterday, we'd need an 8-lane Brent Spence Bridge to Kentucky if we had a 20% sales tax rate here in Hamilton County, because everybody would beat feet right across the river to Kentucky and do all their buying over there.